All right, thank you, folks. We do have some folks dialing in here and joining us via Zoom, but I'd like to get started in the best interest of our panelists' time here on a Friday afternoon during the lunch hour. For those that I have yet to meet in person here in DC or online, my name is Steve Roach. I'm the Senior Associate Director of Regional Engagement and Volunteer Management for the Mid-Atlantic. I focus on supporting our alumni communities from Richmond through Central New Jersey, with a specific focus on our DMV community here. And I'm glad to see so many familiar faces and new faces joining us here today for this wonderful alumni discussion and panel with both alumni here in DC and our Politics and Policy Network. I wanted to just go over a few ground rules for the conversation today, just given the size of the expected attendance, as well as our panelists' time and commentary today. First and foremost, we will have everyone except for the panelists on mute during the conversation, just for ease of conversation and flexibility during the conversation. We also ask that many of you have already done this, but if you don't mind putting your camera off or putting up your name or an image, that would be fantastic. We are expected to have 40+ folks participating today, so we just want to decrease additional background noise or visuals as well. I'll be monitoring the chat throughout the conversation today. We do have some pre-approved questions from our moderator and our panelists, but we'll welcome your questions during the conversation via the chat, and we'll make sure to get to as many as possible during the conversation today. Last but not least, if there's any technical questions that you may have regarding Zoom, if this is your first time or in this day and age, millionth time using Zoom, I'll be fielding any technical questions or issues in the chat as well. Again, for those that might not be familiar with Zoom, the chat function is down on the lower part of the menu bar, and then you are able to mute yourself or adjust your video using the mute and stop video portions at the bottom of the screen. At the conclusion of today's sessions, I'll go over some information from the Alumni Association, our DC networks, and more. But without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Becca, who's a board member with our Politics and Policy Network and will serve as the moderator for today, to introduce our panelists and talk a little bit more about our session and begin today's discussion. So Becca, I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Thanks so much, Steve. And so excited to have so many folks joining the call today, as well as to talk with our great panel. I'll introduce myself first. I'm from Rhode Island. I'm currently living in Rhode Island, and I work for the Senator from Rhode Island, Sheldon Whitehouse. I'm a legislative aide on his health portfolio. I previously worked on Senator Claire McCaskill's campaign in Missouri for 1.5 years, and I graduated from Emory in 2017. And I graduated alongside Val McMakin, who I am excited is joining our panel today. She is currently a legislative assistant for Senator Jon Tester from her home state of Montana. And she started off as an intern in that office and worked her way up as a staff assistant at LC, and she's now in LA. We are also joined by Josh Isaac. He graduated from Emory in 2011 and then got his law school degree from the University of Florida. And Josh is currently the legislative director on the House side for Congresswoman Nanette Berrigan, but he has also worked on the Senate side in various capacities for a couple of different senators. And then last but not least, we are also joined today by Gerald Wong, who is a legislative assistant on economic policy for Senator Perdue of Georgia. And Gerald graduated from Emory in 2005 and from Emory Law School in 2009. So really excited to have this diverse mix of perspectives on our panel today. And I'll go ahead and just ask a couple of general questions for the full panel. So whoever wants to be brave enough to jump in first would be great, but would love to hear from all of you. If you could just start off by discussing a little bit your time at Emory, if you took any classes that maybe particularly inspired you to go into policy work, or to go work on the Hill, and if any classes have been helpful during your time at the Hill, and you can also mention maybe any internships you did during your time at Emory.
I guess I can start. Hi, I'm Josh. So I went to Emory. It was 2007 to 2011. I majored in political science and also went to the B school. And so some of the internships I had, I spent a summer after the first year with a state senator back in Florida. That's where I'm from. And then the second summer, I went to Washington to intern for my congressman at the time, Robert Wexler. Classes I took, I think some of the things, it's funny, some of the things I think were most helpful at Emory, I did a lot in the theater program. And I think that it translates well to work on the Hill because you're being creative, you're being collaborative, you're working in teams. Because a lot of things in the business school, my marketing classes haven't really helped over here. But I think that's a lot of the stuff that I've done that I think was really helpful. And then in law school, I also I interned at the DNC for a year, so that was also very helpful.
I guess I'll go next. I don't know if there's any classes per se I took that helped as much. I mean, I was an international studies major. I think it's more a lot of the internships and externships I took in law school that I think it just helped in terms of perspectives. I did work for a bankruptcy judge for a bit of time, and that helped give me a perspective on just on a different facet of how workouts and everything else worked. I worked, during college, I interned for my congressman at that time from the Chicago area, Mark Kirk. But to tell the truth, I kind of stumbled into politics more because I graduated in '09, which was a bad year to really start practicing law. And a friend of mine convinced me to take a job with, at that point, Governor Sonny Perdue, and drifted into really into the legislative process that way. I think, law school doesn't really prepare you to practice law, but it does prepare you to kind of teach yourself a lot of things that you didn't learn. For example, going into the banking space, I had to relearn a lot of things because what law school taught me on banking, Dodd-Frank kind of completely changed the dynamics on.
Yeah, I can go next. I think that the things I took away from Emory were, one, there was a great criminal justice, constitutional law series of classes that I loved and showed me that the law can actually be super interesting, which I don't think I'd experienced before that. And the other thing is Emory taught me to read extremely high volumes, which sounds dumb, but has come in very handy on the Hill, because I think that sometimes you're required to go, a mile wide, an inch deep, and be an expert on things that you never even knew about before. And that ability to kind of churn through material has proved very helpful.
Cool. Well, Gerald touched a bit on this about how you weren't really expecting to wind up on the Hill. But if you want to talk a little bit more about that, and if Val and Josh, you want to chime in at all with, how you wound your way to the Hill, was it something you always wanted to do? Did you kind of fall into it? How did you get there?
So I was looking at doing more corporate law going to law school. I think around 2009, it pretty much either you had the choice of deferring or you had your choice of trying to search for something else. And at that point, during college, I was active in the College Republicans. I still had some friends around in Georgia, and one of them told me to go in as a as a deputy in the governor's office. And I went in thinking I was going to practice law with a legal department, but really they stuck me as a liaison with the General Assembly, which, I think it helped me in terms of preparing me for the legislative process, because you learn to herd cats. And I think I stuck around with the pro temp in the lieutenant governor's office through the redistricting cycle. Tried my hand in lobbying and realized how much I hated being a contract lobbyist, especially on the state and local side. There were interesting clients, Tesla, Uber, and Airbnb, but it was just very much you have to quickly cram to learn your client's issues, advocate for them, and then drop them as soon as, if they don't sign on, you have to relearn another client, and it could be everything. You could shift from, basically you're talking about gig force work issues to healthcare within a month. And working in the state level, I got to know, I was looking for opportunities to go up to the federal level to just keep working on policy. And I worked on my current boss, Senator Perdue's campaign, because I was part of kind of the Perdue family. And at that point, he was not exactly expected to win. So the entire family was expected to chip in and help with his campaign. And generally, when you win the campaign, you get to kind of pick and choose what you wanted to do. And I was lucky enough to get an offer to come up here as a legislative assistant and slowly build my portfolio up here.
I guess I can go next. So I was sort of the opposite. I didn't want to practice law in law school. I learned very early on that just wasn't my cup of tea. So after law school, took the bar exam over in Florida, and I was like, well, what am I going to do with my life? So I said, I enjoyed interning. I like politics a lot. So I was like, look, let me try to come to Washington and work on the Hill. And I ran into a lot of issues where people were like, well, to work in DC, you have to live in DC. And I would say, well, you give me a job, I'll come and I'll work for you. That's how this is going to work. I'm not going to, go back and forth from Florida every day. But I was able to get a short-term gig at a education consulting firm downtown that paid me like $5 an hour for like a fellowship. But I was like, that's enough to maybe eat for a little bit. So I did that for a few months, but I was like, I would like to go to the Hill. And so I just would reach out blindly to offices, people that were in those offices, say, hey, this is who I am. Can I just talk with you, meet with you? And so I did that. And then most people are like, hey, look, we don't have anything or, whatever. But I met with someone in Harry Reid's office and they said, look, we don't have a job, but we can give you an internship if you want. I was like, that's fine. So I went from $5 an hour to $0 an hour. And it was sort of that thing where I had interned, 5 or 6 years previously on the Hill. And I was like, where will I be in 5 or 6 years? In the exact same place. And I was like, oh God, what has my life become? That's okay. I was like their legal intern. I did that for a few months, still trying to get, jobs, obviously. And a lot of people are like, well, you have too much experience because you're a lawyer, so we don't want to offer you like a lower level entry position, but you don't have the Hill experience necessary to do the upper level job, so we don't want to give you that either. So I was like, oh my God, I'm in the twilight zone. So, but eventually in Reid's office, a staff assistant position opened up, and I was like, look, can I do that? Answer phones, give tours, it'd be great. I'll have health insurance and like a salary. And they're like, okay, that's fine, Josh. So I did that for a few months, and then a legislative aid position opened up doing healthcare and financial services. So they offered me that, and I did that until my boss retired. And then it was like, oh no, I'm unemployed again. And it was tough after the election, being in a sort of a Democratic office in 2016. It was like, oh no, there's not a lot of jobs. But I was able to get a short-term gig on the Judiciary Committee in the Senate during the Neil Gorsuch Supreme Court hearings. I was sort of, helping out in like an administrative capacity. Did that for about a month until the hearing was over. And I was like, oh no, unemployed again. So then I went and did the same sort of thing, reaching out to offices, please hire me, please hire me. And then I was able to get a job in Ben Cardin's office, Senator from Maryland, and I did some healthcare policy for him. And then after a certain point, there wasn't a lot of upward mobility in that office. So I was like, look, the 2018 election happened. We gained back the majority in the House. I was like, let's see if I can get a job over there. And then I came over here, was a senior policy counsel for my current boss, and then was promoted to LD a few months after that.
Great. Val, do you have anything to add of your Hill journey?
I think mine was a little less planned. I got an internship with Senator Tester in college. I sort of fell into it. I didn't really know that much about him, but my family loved him, so they said you should apply. And I got to the office and absolutely loved it. And so I just harassed every couple months my senior year and said, you know, hey, I want to move to DC. I want to work for you. Like, please hire me. And I started as a staff assistant a week after I graduated. And I've been there ever since.
Great. And we'll come back to you, Val, shortly. I want to hear a little bit more about your way that you worked your way up through your office. But I have one more question for the full panel, and whoever wants to start first, just to talk a little bit about your day-to-day in your current role. And of course, we all know every day on the Hill could be a total surprise. Never know it's coming, but it's always a joy. So if you could, Val, you want to start just a little bit about what your day-to-day looks like.
Yeah, sure. So I'm a legislative assistant for Senator Tester and doing his commerce portfolio. And so that includes postal issues, it includes agriculture, transportation, infrastructure, trade, a whole group of weird things. So it can really look like anything. Senator Tester sits on the Commerce Committee and the Appropriations Committee. So a good chunk of my week every week is spent either staffing him at meetings or staffing him at either of those two committees. And it really changes day to day. I do postal service, so the last 24 hours have been a little bit chaotic, but it can kind of change based off the political tempo or whatever the issue is that particular week.
Great.
So my direct job is to staff Senator Perdue on the banking committee, and then the past 2 years we haven't done any subcommittee hearings, but if we were to do a subcommittee hearing for housing, urban development, housing, transportation, urban development within the banking committee, I would be talking to my counterparts in Senator Menendez's office about hosting a hearing, trying to figure out the logistics, everything else. But so back when my boss first came onto the Hill, basically I had the entire economic policy tranche, from everything going from budget to pensions, banking, tax, everything else. And slowly they've built, it's a weird setup. I think some office, once again, 100 different Senate offices, 100 different small companies, the way they run things. And even though I'm a legislative assistant, I have a legislative assistant who reports underneath me, who does the budget commerce issues. So half the time I'm also micromanaging issues there, as well as tracking the banking stuff, and then being involved in senior staff discussions to make sure that the flow for just what we call the econ policy team is working. Right now, we're kind of, even though phase 4 is stuck, we're working on everything from trying to find better ways to for GAO to track how spending is being done moving forward, to talking about infrastructure finance bonds and amendments to Main Street lending facilities. And then half the time I'm also our state staff will send us work, and we have to conclude whether it's constituent service or it's policy, and try to run things down that way.
So I'll go. So my day to day, it's really wacky over in the House, sort of like a Wild West. So as a legislative director, I'm sort of in charge of the office. I have 2 legislative assistants below me, also the LC and the staff assistant. And I think my main thing that I do every week is my boss is on the Energy and Commerce Committee, and we're in the Health Subcommittee. So I was hired originally to focus on our healthcare portfolio. So I spend a lot of my week preparing for that hearing, drafting questions, taking meetings. The healthcare portfolio, one of the major things is there's a lot of groups out there, a lot of different disease groups, a lot of different interest groups. Everybody wants to have a meeting and talk about stuff, especially during like appropriations time. So a lot of my day is also just meeting with groups constantly. Everyone's coming in and advocating for something. I mean, it's a little bit easier now that we're in quarantine because we either do something virtually or they just give up. But they send like an email saying like, hey, we would like this XYZ, and then as opposed to having sort of a half an hour meeting. So I spend a lot of time doing meetings. I spend a lot of time staffing my boss. I spend a lot of time sort of editing constituent letters, like everything sort of funnels up. So whenever the two LAs below me have hearings, I edit their hearing questions, or they want to do bills. I make sure to look over sort of their ideas and give them suggestions. And I work a lot with the state staff, sort of coordinating stuff that's happening in the district. And yeah, that's about it. But it changes constantly. It's like nonstop, just everything's coming at you, and you just have to be very, what's the word? Like just nimble. You have to be very nimble.
That is a great description from all of you of our day-to-day lives, which of course can be quite unpredictable. But I have a couple of specific questions for each of you as well. And I wanted to start with you, Josh, because I know you, like you mentioned, you've worked both on the Senate side and the House side. And like you said, the House side is a little bit more of the Wild West environment. So can you just talk a little bit more about the difference between working on either side of the Capitol?
Yeah. So yeah, I think, you know, the Senate's a lot more cerebral. You have, I think senators have a lot more of their like niche sort of areas where like Senator Cardin was like the dental guy. So, you know, he was sort of the one that everyone came to on that issue. But in the House, because, you know, there's so many of them and a lot of them aren't as high profile, they're trying to make their name for themselves. So you have a lot of overlap. You have a lot of people just introducing bills constantly and trying to, you know, find their place. You know, you do a lot more, I think, you try to do things like to get people communication, like get out there with tweets and other stuff so that they can like get hits, because, you know, a lot of people aren't coming to just a random member of Congress in the California delegation that's, you know, 55 people, as opposed to if you're Kamala Harris, now you're vice presidential candidate. So, you know, a lot of it is trying to figure out how you can get your boss's name out there and introduce as much legislation as possible so that they sort of get well known in something, so that, you know, groups and everyone's coming to you asking you to be leaders on things. You know, I think with the House, in the majority sort of rules, like in the Senate where you have things like the filibuster and stuff, things can be a lot slower. The rules are also a lot slower in the Senate to sort of pass a bill. You got to have intervening days and 30 hours of debate and all that stuff. The House, it's like we introduce a bill. If we really wanted to, we could pass that same bill in the same day by just, you know, like powering through with the Rules Committee. So it's a lot faster. Things happen on a day-to-day basis a lot more quickly than if you're in the Senate and you're just like, well, this is Monday and we know what the week is sort of going to be like. But the House, it's like, well, we're going to vote on these things, and then by Tuesday it's like, no, we're voting on totally different things. You just have to be able to respond to that.
Great, thank you. And kind of in a similar vein, a question for Gerald. I know you've, like you said, after law school, you worked in the Georgia state government for a couple of years. Can you compare it all working on the state side versus the federal side?
I mean, the most obvious one is the buck stops here on the federal side. We get blamed for everything, while on the state side, it's really easy to just blame the federal government for a lot of things. But I think a lot of the issues are up here, you know, like I'm just throwing out, but like roughly every Senate office has at least, you know, 80 to 100 employees spread between the state and the federal level. Even House members will have 15 employees. Like on the state side, permanent staff are very rare, especially in Georgia where it's a seasonal. They come in for about 3 to 4 months and they're back home. So most of the state senators have one secretary, or a lot of them share a secretary with another state senator. On the state Senate side, we had between the lieutenant governor and the pro temp's office and the majority side, we might have had about 10 permanent staff. So it really was about building relationships, even as a staffer, with the various state senators. I mean, right now, like one of the benefits of coming from the state level is I actually have personal relationships with 3 of the congressmen in the Georgia delegation. One of them who keeps looking at me completely shocked every time he sees me up here because he still thinks I work in Georgia. It's really things are fast, like things are very slow for 8 months of the year because the General Assembly's out of session, versus on the federal side, you know, we're working 4 or 5 weeks at a time, and then you get a recess week to kind of reset things. But so on the state side, everything's fast. It's compact, it's fast, it's completely based on, you know, I can go up to the state senator if I have a relationship with them, say, this is what you need. You may not have time to read the bill, but trust me, you want to vote yes on it. Versus, I think up here, you're going through, even if you know, we have a good relationship, obviously with Spermer, previously with Senator Isaacson's office and now with Senator Loeffler's office. But even if they come to us with an idea or we pitch something to them, there's 2 to 3 layers of approvals that have to be signed off on before the member will do anything. It's things, I think, are much more methodical up here on the federal level versus on the state level. Sometimes it's like a frat house.
Great, thank you. And I want to come back to Val because, like Val said, she had interned for her current office that she worked in. And I remember I was actually with you the day you got the call that you got the staff assistant job. We were all so excited for you. And you have worked your way up over the last 3 years from staff assistant. You were an assistant to the chief of staff for a little while, and then you became a legislative correspondent, a legislative aide, and now you're a legislative assistant. And this is, for those of you who aren't on the Hill, it's actually pretty unusual to be able to work your way up that quickly through an office, and it's very impressive and speaks to what a talent Val is in her office. But can you just tell us a little bit more about how you kind of worked your way up and took on more responsibility so that you actually became from an intern to an LA that you are now?
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing I would say is a lot of folks I've noticed, and I was the intern coordinator for a long time, so I remember talking to a lot of folks about, you know, their priorities and what kind of policy they were interested in. The biggest thing I would say is just don't say no. I think that people get very rooted into, you know, I want to be a policy person for international affairs or something like that. Like, there are a lot of big, attractive topics out there. I had sort of a weird circumstance in someone left for Senator Tester's campaign in 2018, a couple months before the campaign. And he did agriculture, and no one wanted to do it, and no one knew how to do it. And so I said, sure. The reality is I am not a farm girl. I have not been on a farm since I was like 7. So you know, maybe when I was in college, if you'd been like, you're going to talk to Senator Tester about cattle extensively in 3 years, I would have told you you were crazy. But it was one of those things that it was the right time, right place. And I started with agriculture, and I've gotten, you know, 10 topics since then. So while on the face, I think that it wasn't something I wanted to do, it led to a lot of things that I did want to do. And if I'd said no to that initial opportunity, I probably could have taken a slower route to do the things that I want to do. But I took probably the less traditional path to get there. So I think just don't say no.
That's great advice. Do you or do any of the other panelists have any advice or suggestions for, you know, an intern or an entry-level staffer? You know, how can someone really make an impression on you as a staffer?
Yeah, like I said, I was the intern coordinator for quite a while. And the thing I always told them is, you know, staffers are pretty busy. And we generally in non-pandemic times have probably 3 or 4 waves of interns per year. And frankly, it's a little hard to keep track of. It's a little hard to just keep track of who's in the office. You know, at any given time, we would have 6 to 7 interns. But when I was an intern, you know, I didn't want to be annoying, and I didn't want to say, I don't have enough work. Please give me more work. And so the thing I always told my interns, especially for Hill work, is go ask your LA or your LD, what's something you want to be smarter on? And I'll write a memo on it. Like I'll do a deep dive on some esoteric topic that you don't want to do. And I'll give you the 1,000-foot level. And I found that very helpful just from a policy perspective, but then you as an intern also get the work and you get to, you know, provide context and learn about a topic that maybe you wouldn't have otherwise.
Great. Totally agree with all of that. Josh or Gerald, do you have anything to add to what Val said?
Oh, go ahead, Josh.
I was just gonna say, you know, I think something that's very helpful is, you know, we can be very busy and there's a lot that needs to get done. And sometimes there's work that some people like never think that work is below you kind of thing. Like if I say, hey, I need, you know, a spreadsheet done of all these names and offices and people, and you have to call these offices and figure this out for me. You know, some people might be like, oh, you know, I'm this and that and the other thing. But it's like the people that say, yes, of course, Josh, I will do it and I will do it quickly and well for you. That's always very nice because it's hard to, when you have your normal workload, to be able to do sort of the busy work stuff that's very necessary, but you know, harder to do if you're trying to do some other stuff as well. So you need that support from the interns.
Yeah, and I mean, I think when you get work, I mean, a lot of times this is your first internship or job outside college. It's important to definitely proofread, double check, try to do your, don't rush a project. And I think it's, and if you are working on a project and you have trouble, don't be shy about asking for help earlier on rather than, you know, turning in something that's completely unusable and then like after 4 or 5 days and then kind of trying saying, well, I didn't know what you were looking for. I think we kind of understand that, you know, you were getting kids from college who this might be their first work opportunity. I mean, we are rushed, but, you know, if we're giving you a project, you know, sometimes it is busy work, but a lot of times we might actually use it. So that, and then also, I guess use some common sense and don't act like there's always 1 or 2 people in an intern program that just kind of embarrass the office with a story that, I mean, it's kind of insane. For example, we had one guy who, like, all the offices compile contact lists. So we'll have interns calling every office going, so what does Val, like, who's your commerce person, LA? Who is your probes contact? Who is your LD? Just have names so that we can email them when we have bills and such. And we had one intern who decided to just go around. He created a form and he went around and handed it out to other offices to ask them to complete rather than him doing his own job. And that created, I mean, one, he wasn't even my intern, but we found, like, the entire office found out. And you're talking about 30 to 40 staffers. And then not just that, but the entire delegation found out, and as well as a few other offices who were subject to that. So it just made a really terrible impression on a kid who's trying to probably look for a job later on. So, I mean, I would just say common sense. If you don't know what to do, ask for directions rather than going about on your own.
I'm sure we all have some fun intern stories that we could add on to that, but those were all great pieces of advice. I could see on the side here, we're all nodding along. And, you know, for every kind of silly or embarrassing story we have like that, I'm sure we also all have a great intern that we can think of, and that, you know, if you do have the opportunity to intern in an office, I would really try to, you know, make an impression on staff so that if we ever do see a job opening, you know, you'll come to mind. And if I could add on one more thing, I would say to just keep in touch with people. I have internships that I did, you know, 5, 6, 7 years ago, where I still keep in touch with my mentors there, and they'll continue to be helpful to me. And on the flip side of that, I have interns that interned for me, you know, several years ago that I still still actively keep in touch with me. And I'm always, you know, more than happy to help them. So those are all, I think, really great pieces of advice. We've had a couple of questions come in from the audience. So I just want to ask about one, and this kind of goes along with what we're all talking about with, applying to offices and building up those connections. So of course, you do have an advantage when you're applying to your district, your home district. Val and I both work for our home state senators, which I feel like is super helpful, in our day-to-day jobs, and, is very meaningful. And Gerald, of course, works for the senator from Georgia, where you went to college and law school. But in general, this student wants to know, should you be looking specifically to apply to offices where you might have, that kind of connection, like you went to college there, or you're from there, or you've lived there, or should you focus more on offices that align with your issue interest? So if you specifically want to work on healthcare or agriculture or foreign affairs. So does anyone want to weigh in on that part of the application process?
So as someone who has usually not worked for where I'm from, I would say you want to do all of it. I think you get a leg up if you reach out to an office that that might be your congressperson or senator, or you went to college there. You'll get your foot in the door more easily, but there are a lot of offices that might just take you. Like what I did when I was trying to get on the Hill is, I focused on Florida, but then I emailed literally someone from every Senate office, just every single one. It didn't matter. And I ended up getting a job from someone from Nevada. I'm not from Nevada. I went there one time, with my family, and that's it. And then I got a job with someone from Maryland. I'm not from Maryland. I have no family in Maryland. But what I would say is when I would take meetings with, constituents from those offices, I would say, I'm an adopted Nevadan, I'm an adopted Marylander, now I'm an adopted Californian. So slowly but surely, I'm knocking all the states off the list. But that's sort of what you need to do is, don't think you need to pigeonhole in any way, because then you're going to limit yourself to the potential job opportunities. Because never limit yourself also for the offices you reach out to, thinking that, oh, they'll never get back to you. Because I would have an office from a random state, they completely ghost me, but then Nancy Pelosi's office was like, yeah, sure, come in and we'll do an informational interview. It's I could have said they'll never, respond to me. But that's sort of the thing. It's just anybody and everybody, and just do it. And don't feel bad if no one responds to you, because they're busy, but some people might, so it'd be good.
Great advice.
Yeah, I mean, it would be, it is a game of numbers. You do have a leg up, especially for personal office staff, if you are from that state, or you can show some sort of connection to that state. But I would check the Emory Alumni network, or any other associations you belong to, for somebody who you can know or get to meet in the office, because whenever there's an opening, there's going to be a ton of applications, and you want to have someone on the inside who who met you, have a good impression of you, and would be willing to advocate for you. It's just, but it is also always a numbers, because some offices are quirky. They want, that you go to the right school, or you came from the area, or they are looking for exactly a type of background that you're looking for. So you never know. I wouldn't, yes, you might be interested in a career in healthcare advocacy, but you want to get your foot in the door first, and then try to work maybe through the delegation or the committees that your boss is on to find your next step.
Yeah, I agree. I think, like I said before, don't ever say no. I think that I've seen folks get in trouble when they put the cart before the horse, and they're like, I want to be a healthcare policy advocate in 10 years. That's awesome. But work your way backwards and say, I'm probably going to start answering the phones. So if I can get my foot in the door somewhere, then you're on good standing to prove yourself and prove that you can be a healthcare policy person.
Great. And I think we'd probably all agree with all of that. I know, Val, you talked about earlier how you never thought you'd wind up in agriculture, and now you are the first person I ask when I have a question about, pigs or cows or any other kind of farm animal. And I, for example, never really thought I'd go into healthcare, but now I love working in this space. And kind of like Val said, this is just a position that opened up, and now I love learning about healthcare. Can Josh and Gerald, can you both each touch a little bit too on how you got into your specific issue area? Was it something that you had expertise on, or was that just the door that opened and now you have earned expertise in it, or maybe a little bit of both?
Yeah, no, mine was an accident. Because I was that staff assistant, and then the job that opened up was financial services and healthcare, and I was like, yes, please, I'll do that. I always liked healthcare. I like the idea of helping people and making sure we're trying to find cures for diseases and things like that. But I wasn't like actively trying to go into this policy. I was always like, I'll take literally anything that you'll give me. I just want a job here. But then once you get your foot in the door in that sort of issue area, then you're building expertise on it. And then it's sort of that thing where you're going into the next job. It's like, why would you change now? So then in offices also like that you have this expertise. So then you end up doing it again, and then you build more expertise, and then you go to the next office and do it again. So for me, yeah, it was sort of just an accident.
So for me, I think my boss's priorities have always been kind of the fiscal issues, the budget deficits and just financial markets. When I was working the state level, I did a lot of the appropriations and tax issues. So it was natural for me to kind of transition and handle that. And I kind of took on a lot of the other econ policy issues. It just, it kind of fit naturally. It was my kind of niche, and just I built, again, I think I kind of on the banking issues, I learned a lot more through absorption and through reading and meeting with people. But I think there was a previous question, this thing about how just if you're looking for foreign relations or something like that, don't pigeonhole yourself in, because each committee has their unique little niche that you could potentially work on. Like, you might be interested in foreign relations, but agriculture actually controls all the food aid. Banking committee actually controls all the sanction, a lot of the sanction stuff. And I would say back last year, past 2 years pre-COVID, beyond just a lot of the banking regulations, one of the biggest things we were working on was CFIUS, and which is foreign investments in the U.S., and export controls, which are not normally something that banking staffers should be working on.
That's a great point too, and I'll add on to that. My boss is on the finance committee, and before I started working for him, I had absolutely no idea that a lot of what the finance committee does, if not most, is healthcare, because finance committee has jurisdiction over the Medicaid and Medicare programs. So that's a huge chunk of what they do. So that's another great thing to think about as well. Okay, I want to turn back to a couple more questions we've gotten from the audience. We have a question about salaries working on the Hill. And of course, we are working in public service. It's definitely not, the place that you want to go if you want to become a millionaire. But I think there's a lot of, reasons that we all want to do it. And I'm sure that you all want to do it, who are on the call, that, aren't necessarily based on how much money you want to make. In terms of whether the question has to do with, when is it livable? And you do hear stories of, interns who come in, although now we do pay interns on the Senate side. I'm not sure about on the House side. But, there are stories of interns who come in, or even staff assistants who, work a second job on the side. That's definitely something that people do. But to be perfectly honest, I do think that it is feasible, even on an entry-level staff salary, to live in DC. You can pretty easily fit 3 people into a 2-person apartment. You just kind of build a fake wall to go up. I think it is pretty doable, and there are some really great benefits too of working on the Hill. So you can get your office to pay your student loan payments. A lot of times the healthcare benefits are super generous. So there are some, economic incentives. You can get your Metro benefit too. That's another important one for, when you actually have to take the Metro to work and not just to your living room in normal times. So there are definitely some incentives, and, I think it is livable. I'm not sure if panelists need to chime in on that one, or if not, we can kind of just go to the next question here. The next question is from someone who is a physician in the DC area. So not someone who is necessarily looking for a career in policy on the Hill, but wants to get involved with advocacy. So that's probably a great question for the panel. I'm sure we all meet with advocates who are kind of just working in their spare time. How could someone, whether they're in healthcare space, in education, whatever their field is, how can they get involved with advocacy and talk to their members?
So I'll take that because I meet with people constantly, especially like physicians. So I think, reach out to the American Medical Association, or if there's a certain, if you're, a pediatrician or you have a specialist, do specialty, like find that group that does that and just reach out to them and say, hey, look, I'd like to get involved in advocacy. And what they'll do is they'll make you part of the group. They'll say, hey, what state are you from? Where are you from? They'll probably put you together with a bunch of other physicians from that area. And then they'll do what they call fly-in days. They don't do it anymore because we don't meet in person, but they would set up a meeting and then you'd be part of that fly-in day. And meet with someone like me or the people on the panel, and then advocate for a certain number of bills that you're looking for, or just policy issues that are important to the specialty or just healthcare in general. And then that's how you advocate. I don't know if anyone else has.
Great.
I think that's true.
I think that summed it up really well. Oh, Val, go ahead.
No, I was just saying, I think that sounds true.
Okay, great.
I mean,
yeah,
if
we're
she
all in agreement, yeah.
I was going to say, if she is a physician, I don't know if she's in private practice or working for NIH or one of the agencies, but I know that if you're working for federal agencies, you can actually rotate in as a fellow for a lot of times the committees of jurisdiction. I know, like, for example, Health Committee a lot of times takes on scientists from the national research facilities, and I think there was a doctor who was doing the lead for a lot of the ACA repeal replace stuff. So
yeah, that's another good thing to think about too. And we've certainly had fellows in our office that are, professional scientists or, serve in other roles that come in for a year. And it's really helpful to have their perspectives. They're kind of different perspective in our office. So another question that I have for the panel, sure we've all touched on this and we've all experienced this, but so much of getting a job on the Hill and also, working your way up through the Hill is, getting coffees with people and networking, going to receptions, going to briefings, meeting people. And I'm sure we all miss a lot of that in-person contact. And I think it does make it especially hard for folks who are, either recent graduates or trying to, transition onto the Hill without kind of going to those coffees and everything. So do you have any suggestions for things that either students or alumni can do in this all virtual world that we are in indefinitely? Have you been doing virtual coffees with people, or what are some suggestions that you guys have?
I would say reach out and email. Look, I've generally responded to any email of some Georgia student or Emory alumni interested in politics and try to spend time and talk to them, because on the Hill, you never know who you're going to be working with next. Actually, of the one of the deputies who works for me was my intern that first summer we came up here, and she went out, became a CPA, got burnt out, and then came back. But she kept in touch with the office and was looking desperately for a job. So we hired her. We have another one who's just, it was a random coffee I took, and I realized how much she actually enjoyed doing the budget process, which I was looking to offload to someone else. So 4 months later, we hired her. So you just never know.
Yeah, I always like to pay it forward because, you know, I was that person that was reaching out wanting people to talk to me. So whenever someone reaches out, I most likely will respond. I've had a couple during this quarantine period where I just had phone calls with them and we just sort of did what we normally do. I learned about them and they told me what they wanted to do and what they're interested in. And, you know, I say, hey, send me your resume and let me know when you apply for a job and I'll send it along, try to find someone in that office to help. So I'm, you know, usually open, but it hasn't really changed. I just don't see them face to face now.
Yeah, I think same thing. I think something, I mean, I also think I was very focused on paying it forward because I relied on a lot of people to get to where I am. And I had a lot of mentors who were very helpful. But the other thing is if you have like a list of things you're interested in, at least I'm personally very happy to introduce you to other people. Like, you know, each of us have our own individual networks on the Hill. And if you say you're interested in XYZ policy in these regions, you know, we can try to be helpful. I think that that's something people did for me. So happy to pay it forward.
Great. I think that's all great advice. And I'll echo that. If, you know, I'm always happy to do a virtual coffee or a phone call with folks. And hopefully we'll be getting in-person coffee someday soon. Last question for me. I was just wanted to hear a little bit more about how each of your jobs have changed during this COVID time. I know mine certainly has. I think it's touching all of our issue areas in so many ways, in addition to obviously what our day-to-day is like and communicating with our offices. So Val, you're up. Do you want to start first with that one?
Sure. It has changed in that you know, previously I think I have, call it 8 to 10 issue areas, and maybe 2 of them had big problems all at once. And now, you know, I do nutrition and food supply and postal and transportation, and all of those things are imploding. So it has made working in a Senate office a little bit more complicated. I think that it just, you know, we are on call a lot more. I think that things are changing at a much more rapid pace. Conversely though, I think that we're having a much bigger impact, if I can say that. I think that, you know, each one of us is pitched in with constituent work and helping people get, you know, payments from the IRS or trying to, you know, help people get additional SNAP benefits and things like that. And so I think while it has the pedal, you know, foot's on the gas a little bit more, I think that we're having more of an impact. So it's changed, but it's just different.
Yeah. So for us, I think we've one of the first steps we did was reduce the exposure of how many staff are seeing the senator. Given that, you know, COVID is, well, he's perfectly healthy, he's fine, but he is over 70. So I think we've really reduced it down to about 4 or 5, or I think 6 staff total in DC who staff him on any given day when he's in session. So that means I mostly work out my house. I go in 2 to 3 times a week in the office when I have to staff them, or for committees, or just staff them and brief them on issues. But I think it is like I would say that we've been definitely working far more hours. You know, on the banking finance side, when PPP rolled out, it felt like every single night I was up till 9 or 10 still working, calling constituents, trying to either talking to lenders, trying to give them clarity, or talking to constituents trying to apply for a PPP loan. And I knew that was just simply the tip of the iceberg, because our constituent staff were dealing with, like I was getting the most difficult cases they couldn't handle, but they were constantly inundated with them. It is harder because normally you get to see other staff on a regular basis to try to work with people and talking to people over phones, trying to communicate via email. Sometimes they're aggravating because like I tried to give the benefit of the doubt, the other side they're slammed, and that's why they're taking a day or 2 to respond. But it's harder versus when you regularly see them on a daily basis. So.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I work harder now than I did previously. But also I haven't been back in the office since March, so it feels like it's probably like a weird time capsule over there. Like my dress shoes are still over there. Like everything's probably just the way it was on like whatever March 11th or whatever when everything changed. But I find my life to be a lot more efficient now because I realized how just little things throughout the day. Like it takes me a half an hour to commute to the office and back. So that's an hour of the day gone. Now I can put work, I do work in that time now. Or even like you take a meeting and say the meeting's in the Capitol, it's not in your office. It takes 15 minutes to walk to the Capitol, 15 minutes to walk back. It's another half an hour and I just pick up the phone when the meeting starts. So I found that there's a lot more hours in the day that I'm able to do stuff, but then that also increases the workload on myself as well. And there's no like distractions where, you know, I could be like, oh, I'm going to procrastinate and go to the front desk and see what's going on. There's no front desk now. It's just my apartment. So there's things like that too.
Well, thank you guys all so much, Josh, Val, and Gerald, for your insightful answers. This was a lot of fun. I hope it was useful to some of the students and alumni calling in. I know it was certainly useful to me and enjoyable to talk to some fellow Emory alums and fellow Hill staffers. And I will now turn it back over to you, Steve.
Well, thank you, Becca. I really want to compliment you. We'll talk a little bit here in closing about our new Politics and Policy Network here in DC, but wanted to thank you for not only pulling this panel discussion together, but being really instrumental in helping build and support this network here. So thank you. And Gerald, Josh, and Val, thank you for participating and lending your expertise. I know we have a number of students on the line, young alumni, as well as seasoned political professionals. So this is a great opportunity to listen and learn and share, and we hope is the first of many opportunities for this. Just in closing, I'd like to highlight a few things. First, I dropped in the chat 2 key links that I'll touch on here, but with over 5,600 alumni in the greater DMV area, we now have 13 local Emory networks in the DC area to support your interests and ways to be engaged around identity, affinity, your industry, interest area, and more. And we'll be looking to host about 2 to 4 events a month virtually to begin with, and hopefully in person during the pandemic here for our alumni in DC. So we hope that you'll get engaged. The Emory DC Politics and Policy Network is rather new this year, and Becca is a member of the board, and their next events will be announced soon, including a couple more panel discussions with the Career Center and Emory students, as well as opportunities to network and more. I highlighted in the chat the Emory Collective is our new university hub for content, events, updates, and more, as well as recordings from previous programs that you can take advantage of. So we hope that you'll check that out and participate in a number of other programs, including 3 upcoming Election 2020 events with faculty, ranging from discussing current rulings by the Supreme Court through healthcare legislation and a post-election debrief in November. So we look forward to seeing you participating there. In addition to Becca, I'd like to highlight a couple folks here on the call that are joining us that are volunteers locally. I'd like to thank Josh Jackson, who's the VP of the Politics and Policy Network, Emma Reedy and Anish Nalla, who are also joining the board here, as well as our other DC volunteers, Emily Hennessy, who has led Emory Cares projects here in DC, Cynthia Ramos with our Legal and Asian American Pacific Islander Network, as well as Emily Gruber with the AAPI network as well. So there's a lot of ways to get involved here locally. So if you are interested in being a board member and a volunteer, participating in an event, or learning more about how you can be engaged as an Emory alum here in the DC community or more broadly, feel free to reach out to me on the staff side or Becca with the network. You can simply reach us at regionalnetworks@emory.edu. That's a perfect way to reach our regional team and get connected with our individual networks across the country. And then just 2 final points. Many of you and Gerald highlighted the importance of utilizing your Emory network for career advice, mentorships, and connections. Besides a follow-up message from this panel sharing contact information for panelists or others on the line that work on the Hill that may be of service or reference, we do hope you to utilize Emory Connects, which is Emory's proprietary career and mentorship platform to build a network amongst your Emory alumni and current students. So please do create a profile at connects.emory.edu. And in closing, I would be remiss, as we have many students on the line that are looking at opportunities during this challenging time, that our alumni play a role not only with their time and talent, but also with their treasure. And we hope that you will consider making an annual gift to Emory. Annual philanthropy plays a critical role in ensuring Emory's current and future successes and helps us to create, engage, and inspire. So please visit giving.emory.edu to learn about our momentum campaigns to fund specific initiatives at the university, or make an annual gift to a club, an organization, or other areas that are important to you as part of the Emory community. So again, Becca, I wanted to thank you for your leadership with this call and with the board, for Val, Gerald, and Josh for taking part today and lending your expertise. We'll be sending a follow-up note from this with additional information and some of these notes that I shared, but wishing everybody a fantastic rest of their Friday and a lovely weekend, and look forward to seeing you on a future call or virtual event in the near future. Take care, everyone.